So, hey there, welcome to the Wisdom of Grief podcast, where we explore the journey of loss and rediscovering joy. I'm your host, Leslie Hunt Palumbo, and today we have an amazing guest. We get to talk with therapist and author Sally McQuillen about her recently released book, Reaching for Beautiful, a memoir of loving and losing a wild child. And I just absolutely love the book, but I first want to say, welcome. Sally and I met in graduate school, immediately connected, and it was before either one of us was married or had kids or had a family, which is so hard to believe. In fact, I was at your wedding, which is amazing, and such happy memories. And like we've kept in touch over the years through our lives and losses as therapists. And I'm so grateful to call you a friend. I'm so grateful that you will come and share about your book. You are a beautiful, honest, deeply insightful writer, and I cannot wait to dig right in. So, warm welcome to you.
Oh, Leslie, I'm so touched. It just feels like this circular touching into a soul sister moment,
Yeah,
and to think that we've had these shared losses, or that we've both had significant losses in our lives, and that has drawn us into the work that we do and helped us
yeah,
take our experience and sort of parlay it into hopefully helping other people that are going through things such as this as well.
yeah. It's amazing. So, I want to start by giving that beautiful summary of your book, just to introduce it to people who have not yet read it, which it's a total must read. It's just it's so beautifully written. I mean, the title's perfect, Reaching for Beautiful. So it's a luminous story of how love triumphs over pain, love transcends fear, and love never dies. This debut memoir from a mother grieving her young adult son's death is a must read for any parent who has lost a child, is raising a child from the edge of their seat, or whose family struggles with addiction. When Sally's 21-year-old son died in a boat accident, her greatest fear is realized. Christopher was often drawn to risk and struggled with addiction. In this riveting memoir, Sally captures the wild ride of his jam packed life and her deep love for him while reflecting on her own childhood and family legacy of alcoholism. So, that I just have to say, you have written an incredible book. Like, I was really blown away. Like, we've spoken about your loss of Christopher over the years, and I still have this kind of deep, like sorrow for your loss. And you painted the most truly beautiful portrait of him. Like, you gave it's a beautiful biography of his life, really, and your life as a mother. And I actually like feel like I know him. He has that, I think he has that like celebrity quality, and I feel like I have a little shine, or just somehow I've been
I
affected by
hope
his
so.
life, right? Like, and that
I
feels
hope
like a
so.
gift. So I thank you for that.
My pleasure. There were a number of things that ultimately I set out to do in taking what started as just journal writing to him to connect with him.
Mm,
21 days after he died, I began to do that. And then I don't know, it was maybe just a few months later, I thought, is there something that more that I can accomplish with in so doing if I turn this into a book? And then as I began to think about it that way as something that would end up in readers' hands, I thought about, oh, what a great opportunity to capture his life and all of the memories and
mm,
hopefully, you know, crystallize his spirit and way of being in such a way that other people who never got to know him here on earth could really feel what he was all about. And then also, I wanted to attempt to do an inside look at what it felt like in acute grief over the loss of a child, and hoped that maybe that would help fellow bereaved parents or even fellow bereaved of any loss
yeah.
sort of feel less alone in it.
Yeah, and you do a beautiful job of that. And it's also even an account of it's a mother grieving a child. You give an inside look at what that's like. You also give a look at what it's like to grieve, period, what it's like to be in deep grief, what it's like to have that intolerable feeling inside, like what that that's just like there's a one thing for everybody. Like we all have that one thing where it really gets us. And so you give a nice accounting of how to move through that. The way you move through it is inspiring. So it's like we want to stay with it because we're inspired by it. So that's amazing. And also just an account of motherhood, really. Like, even just the way we like as mothers loving a wild child too, and who hasn't loved a wild spirit, even if it's not a child. Like we've all loved somebody who's got that bright spark, and but the motherhood piece is interesting, I think, because it motherhood in and of itself, we give ourselves such a trip, such a hard time, such a guilt
Don't
thing.
we? I've been thinking about that because my daughter is about to get married this summer, and I have two living
Congrats.
children, and she's getting married in August, and so she's already begun thinking about, having children of her own. And I've been thinking about how maybe it was in our generation, but when you've been in the workforce, and then in my case, I had the privilege of essentially being a full-time mother, going stepping sort of out of a workforce, which for me was a marketing background before I'd
Mm,
pursued my graduate degree in social work, when I realized that I wanted to do something that would be sort of more of a natural calling for me than pounding the pavement. um,
yeah.
I felt like, um, and maybe you just do this as a mother no matter what, but we bring to it so many high standards and expectations, as if this is a job that we need to be perfect at when we've never even done it before. And so here, Christopher, being my firstborn and having challenged me at the starting gate, I had this sort of constant sense of, oh, I'm just not doing it right or well enough.
Yeah. Or that, it's that idea. I could really relate. You wrote in the book to how, like, if he wasn't okay, I couldn't be. Right. Like, I have,
Yes.
like as a parent, we can all relate with that. And just this sense of if something's wrong, it must be something I'm doing too. If something's going wrong, if something's not right, if something's not fitting, it must be my fault. So that's like already one layer, I think, that we can all relate to.
It really is. And then the grief over the loss of a child is exacerbated by that, because there's a sense of failure resulting from not having kept my child alive, because that is, the foundational expectation. And then there's this inevitable component of grief always, I think, which is guilt anyway.
Yeah.
So it's
Yeah.
I've lost him. I've lost a part of my identity. And I am, it's such a natural response to this powerlessness,
Mm.
especially when you are young and embarking on parenting. You think you have so much more power than you ultimately recognize
I
you
know.
do.
I know. I wish we knew that. I wish we knew that, how little control we really had. Even if we say it, even if intellectual we know it, we don't really know it until we really know it. At the moments
That's
when
so
we have
true.
no control, and then it's like, wow, I really have no control. But
That's
you
exactly
do like
right.
a beautiful job in the book of moving yourself through that guilt. And I do think it's so many layered. There's mother guilt, there's mother loss of a child guilt, there's the guilt of general that comes with grief. It's such a central element to grief. And like I said, I feel like it's this thing, like this unlivable, intolerable piece, usually is related to guilt, some kind of guilt over something we didn't do, should have done, might have done. And you do a beautiful job of there's like an arc in the book of how you start with this unlivable, intolerable, and then you move yourself through all these different avenues, and with the help of Christopher, really, who's like a central supporting force in your life, which is so amazing and so hopeful. And you move yourself to this kind of like grief grace, this kind of like, okay, I'm gonna, I don't know, you move yourself through to somehow like this combination of some self-forgiveness, some emotional release, some forward motion. And that just produces something that feels feels like it's moving, or it moved for you, I guess.
I'm grateful to hear that. It is such a process, isn't it, to be on. That's why I suppose they call it a grief journey. And I feel so truly blessed that somehow pretty early in the process, I began to try to embody Christopher as a source of strength, his spirit. And
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
helped me. I couldn't have done whatever I've done without that, without ultimately finding, you know, that he could become a part of me. I also think my spiritual foundation that was there before having lost him facilitated some of this process, from guilt to self-forgiveness, from any number of different things to something beyond that.
Yeah. Oh, so you wrote something. This is your dedication. I need to read it because it touched me. I agree with you. What you're saying is like you called upon him and his character and his spirit in order to fuel your healing, in order to, and that is a beautiful thing, you know. And it's a, like, you in the dedication you say, Christopher, I hope the power of my love for you punches into your dimension like a firework. Thank you for shining so bright. You've become the light in me. You make my life as your mother so beautiful. But like, it's like you made him the light inside you. And you were like, this is how I'm moving through this. Like, I don't know how. It's so disoriented. It's like you wake up every day and this nightmare replays itself in your head. And you really fueled yourself. And that's like an endless source of fuel. So it's amazing. And that's so
Well,
inspirational for all people grieving, and particularly the grief of a child.
I hope so. I hope that it is, because I do think that that connection is such an essential ingredient. And the acuity of the despair, and the when when our worlds are rocked to the extent that they are, when it really feels as if, and for me it felt as if, I was talking about, there was when Caroline was 2 and Christopher was 4, we had lightning strike a tree next to our house. And we were out of our house for about 5 months to restore it. During
Oh,
that time, there were neighbors who talked about the fact that some of the pulp from the tree itself landed all the way down the next block. That is what, that sort of creates this visceral illustration of what it felt like to have lost him. And you sort of like something struck my heart, and I was falling, and so I needed to find a way to tether myself. And over time, that yearning, I found that which I sought in his spirit, and then pulled it close.
yeah. And so I always think about in grief how having a goal or like a healing intention or like a mantra is super grounding, because like you described, when it hits and then you're just like you're like you don't know how to stand, you don't it there is just no ground. And especially even in shock, it's so disorienting. So if you when you have that kind of mantra, and you developed that sort of fuel, but you also did have a mantra, which I thought was your mantra, which I loved, which again was the source of it was Christopher, because it was a tweet that he made, right?
Right. He made a tweet probably a month before he
Can you tell that
passed.
I'm so old that I said he made a tweet? Like
I know. I don't
come on.
even
I'm
know what
sorry.
I was never on
So
Twitter. I
uncool.
had never seen it.
Me
It wasn't
neither.
until after he passed that I could. Thankfully, I had access to his phone, and I could see any number of tweets, some of which I include in my memoir, in Reaching for Beautiful. And he, so shortly after he passed, many of his friends were reposting this tweet. And the
Mm,
tweet reads, "Life is honestly so beautiful as long as you allow it to be."
mm.
And when I saw that, it did encapsulate some of where I intuitively felt he was guiding me. Um, he guided me into a spiritual course that I began to study. And a lot of that course is related to something I'd been working on as a life lesson even before he died, which was to try to again, move through from fear into love being so central.
Yeah.
And I thought, of course, initially it's interesting when I saw that, and then a friend ended up engraving it on bracelets, and then now I wear bracelets every day to look at and remind
Mm.
me of the beauty in the world. Initially, all I could do was think about the absence of his beauty. And I'm probably biased, but he was a beautiful boy.
Mhm.
And, think Brad Pitt in A River Runs Through It. He did have a light and sparkly green eyes, and he was charming. And I missed him so desperately that I knew I had to rise beyond the pity of having felt deprived of his physical presence,
Mhm.
um, to a point of gratitude. And that's what this mantra really helped
Yeah.
cultivate.
Yeah. It's so beautiful. And it's like this North Star, like it's kind of like, well, this is where I'm headed. I know I'm not there now. I get that but I want to, I'm reaching for beautiful. Like it's so well put. And also like on two levels, that's amazing. It's amazing that I don't know. That is such an incredible tweet, like to say life is honestly so beautiful because he was feeling it in his heart and wanted to express it. And to know that he had that experience, to know that like we want everyone we love to be in touch with that spontaneous joy and like, wow, like that awe of how incredible life is.
Ah,
And he
and
had a short life so
mhm.
that the fact that he got to experience that it warms my heart too, and also the fact that he is reaching back from you from his life. He's reaching forward to help you all throughout the book. There are so many signs, there are so many so much, there's a quest for you to find continuing connection, but it's almost like things are being left to you. It is, I know you mentioned the spiritual study, which was, I think, the Course in Miracles, that was sort of, he somehow put you in touch with that. I think about like the horses. There's a lot of,
Oh,
there's stuff that is just so directly connected. So many signs.
yes. I think if we're open to that, and I do believe that there's a certain degree of desperation to forging that openness, but I also was, my husband was much more inclined to have a conviction that there is some afterlife, and that helped me. And he was immediately thinking in terms of reaching out to mediums to try to channel Christopher's spirit. And then ultimately he felt like he could hear him. So I was reaching for all of that, and then rewarded, really powerfully rewarded through that process of, almost like there's absolutely no way I can sort of subscribe to this skepticism that is a natural part of me. It's like
Yeah.
I have to believe he's here.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree. But you write something lovely in the book. It makes me think about, I think about how this is what the research says. The research says that 70% of people, and I think that's so low, have these experiences of synesthesia, or just moments that are more than moments, or signs, or animals, or
Mhm.
encounters, or seeing the person or hearing from the person in some way that is incredibly meaningful. And we do write it off to shock, or our skeptic, our natural skeptic, kind of questions it. And you wrote something, you said something, signs are as close as I can get to evidence that my heart is still connected to my sons and that life goes on. And that is so well put too. And I think to myself, well, even if, because I'm a believer in signs, I've experienced signs, I I feel like I questioned them all along the way. And I'm so glad that I wrote mine down so I can remind myself sometimes of what it
That's
was that actually
true.
really happened that was so kind of unbelievable. And I hear so many unbelievable stories of it. And then I think to myself, like, and who even, like, does it even matter to me? Really, does it matter if this isn't true? It doesn't matter to me. Here's why: because it helps me. It helps me in my grief to believe this. I choose to believe it. And whether it's true or not, I don't care, because it helps me. It makes me feel better about my grief. And that's really the guiding light: moving towards what feels better, keeping away from what makes you feel worse. So if it
I
makes you
couldn't
feel
agree
better, it's
more.
very effective.
I couldn't agree more. It has been like an essential ingredient to my survival, to deepen that belief,
Yeah.
and to continue to stay open to it. And it is really interesting how over time it's even possible to take those things for granted, or think, oh, I'd better write that down because that just happened and now I'm busy with my life, and I it might disappear.
Yeah. It's so true. And you have you mentioned your husband, and he wrote several books, and he wrote a beautiful book on, like, it was Talking to Christopher from the Other Side. That was his first book, right?
My
uh,
Search for Christopher on the Other
my
Side was
Search
his
for
first
Christopher.
book.
Yes. Yeah.
And then he wrote a second that, in his inimitable fashion, he's written two already and working on a third. And I am putting this one, reaching for beautiful, out into the world. And that will probably be my only one. And he's been able to, and it's so interesting to me how we grieve uniquely. How there are these universalities, like we touched on, in terms of the guilt and different aspects of the grieving process, but that, I want to talk about the importance of respecting each person's way of um, establishing that kind of connection.
Yeah, it's so true. And I think it's whatever helps, right? And I
It
think it's
is.
probably, and I think of it as hard, because I don't know what it was like for you. And I mean, you both had a respect for one another, and the way you were processing it, that was kind of lovely, that you show in the book. Um, because there are certain things that are very much the same. You're both his parents. And then there are certain things that are different, because you had different individual relationships with him, and it was father, mother. And of course, there's all that unique stuff. And then there's our unique way, which is like how we process grief, how we do it is going to be different.
Very much so. And I think about that in terms of the childhood trauma that we each might have brought to our parenting. And I think about how we were traumatized in having lost him. And I do believe that anyone who loses a child is traumatized, just by
Completely.
sheer virtue of it happening out of time.
Yeah. Yeah.
And and certainly in our case, in this unexpected way. And so all of that factors into how we navigate. Someone was asking me about my relationship with Joe and saying, did you have a lot of conflict? We know that marriages can break up over the loss of a child. And I was saying, we actually had so much more conflict when it came to attempting to keep him safe while he was here than we
Yeah.
have since the point at which we've shared in the you know incredible fierceness of our love for him.
Yeah. Right. Right. That's so beautiful. You also, in your quest, had tried so like all these different forms of support, like supportive therapy, and you had this therapist. I love your therapist. I love your therapist in the book. She's like, she says at one point, she's like, she suggests this beautiful thing. She says, picture yourself being comforted by someone. If you were to picture yourself being comforted by someone, like about this inconsolable, part of grief, who would it be? And you identified your grandmother. But that was
Mm,
such a beautiful suggestion. I love that.
I do too. And I'm so grateful that during the course of this time, it's now been 9 years in our field, we hear sort of these catchwords of self care thrown around. And self compassion, though, was just beginning to be one of the features of self care that was um, I couldn't have again come through this without having deepened my ability to think in terms of talking to myself or channeling sort of my grandmother Sally's nurturing nature. And there was something about, you know, this was a permission slip that I'd never before. I'd heard it said many times, especially as a therapist. I've preached it, take care of yourself to the nth degree, but this meant that I had to, that it forced my hand to be looking at how to take care of myself and utilizing absolutely every possible resource that was out there to be able to um, just stay on that solid ground.
Yeah. I mean, and it's because it seemed like it's a matter of survival. It became a matter of survival. So then, and I do think it's such a critical piece of grief because and I actually think that grief is really like a developmental passage. I think everyone has to go through it, not
Mm,
necessarily traumatic grief, thank God, but people have to go through it in some way, and that we're supposed to get certain things out of it. We go through it at different times during life, but one of the things we're meant to get out of it is an expansion of our ability of our self-care, our self-compassion, because it's kind of forced. If you want to make it through, you have to be nice. And so many times I'll have clients come in and I'll say, and it just, this is, you're going to like about self care. We'll start talking about something that, oh, I don't really do that. Like, that's not my strength. I'm not good at that. And I get it, because it just, we
we
have to
do.
dig deep there's a progress that you make in the book as you kind of, you begin to really hold your own hand and walk yourself through this. And it's yeah, I was going to ask you, like, of all the therapies and the support things that you tried, like you had EMDR for the trauma and energy work and equine therapy and was there like one dominant thing that kind of helped or the most, or was it
I think I needed all of it. I
yeah,
think
like a
that's the
combo?
other. I think that's one of the things that's been humbling for me in certain regards, that putting my oxygen mask on means, ensuring that I'm eating right, I'm getting enough sleep, I'm exercising, I'm taking my medication, I'm um, attending therapy and specialized therapy and being a member of a support group. There's really nothing that it hasn't meant I've needed to
Yeah,
rely upon.
yeah.
Um, I think even the process of writing, I would say the process of writing itself surprised me in terms of how powerful that was in promoting healing.
Hmm. Hmm.
Hugely,
Yeah,
hugely.
absolutely. And I also sense that it's your, like, you had this sheer determination to get behind yourself. And again, part of that was really related to staying connected to Christopher or learning from him or continuing to find him in your life. But you show a real dedication. Okay, think of it as like the kindness clause, like this mental emotional agreement to meet yourself where you're at and take yourself wherever you need to go. And that's really lovely.
I love that, Leslie, and I think this is another thing that is, I want to impart to anyone who is grieving is this is such a messy long, complex, layered journey. And especially for those who also, I'm sure you know this so intimately, when you have one loss and you haven't necessarily fully reconciled other losses, everything comes out to play. And
Hmm.
so it is this incredible opportunity to um, look back at, because all of our old wounds are informing our current ones, um, and sift through in such a way that we're not being. I've tended to be perfectionistic in certain regards. I've certainly been guilty of trying to pull myself up by the bootstrings. You referenced determination. I can't help but be determined. That's my MO. I'm a doer. But to actually sort of begin to integrate something that is a different kind of strength, a real vulnerability and a
Hmm.
real softening, and allowing things to be awful at times,
Hmm.
and knowing, and then sort of calling on our faith to know that that won't last forever.
Yeah, right, right. Calling
Yeah.
on our faith for sure, because the voice of it will tell us it's going to be there forever. And it's very hard to see in the early days of grief. It's so dark. You don't see that future, which is why you kind of have to reach for that tweet and say, but I'm headed here. I know I've got to get here.
Yes, and I would say for me, for years, it required, and maybe it continues to, but like for me, the early grief was years long. So I think there
Yeah.
is something. Maybe it's specific to the loss of a child. There, it is. It is a forever.
Yes.
I don't want to
Yes.
use the word sentence, but it is. I will be grieving forever, and I'm now um, beyond the point at which I'm saturated in the despair of it. But that doesn't mean, as I think I write, that there aren't times when I'm ambushed by it and have to have that faith that if I let it kind of come over me and move through it, that it will lighten, and that
Hmm.
the
Hmm.
love will sort of um, supersede or dissolve the pain.
Yeah, that's so true. Okay, so this is the question I've been wanting to ask you too, and it's from your afterword. If I can just read this part, because it is about the intensity of grief. And I think it's different for all of us, but I think it's much longer. I think it's intense for much longer than people realize, but it's also, it's interesting how you characterize it here. You say, it took me 7 years to write Reaching for Beautiful, which I condensed into the first year of my grief journey. And it took me 7 years, 4 months, and 19 days after losing Christopher to start to feel like myself again. I want to normalize the fact that the grief process for those suffering the loss of a child lasts a lifetime. My acute early grief lasted at least 4 years, even though to the outside world I appeared to be functioning. The third year, I cried nearly every day with few exceptions. The first years, I cried every day, endlessly surrendering to waves of sorrow or bracing against them. I have read this to my clients. I thank you for this. And that it is so helpful to hear somebody who has walked the path say, hey, set and it's you write it beautifully. So much of it is on the inside after a certain period of time. Everybody thinks I'm fine,
Right.
but like I
Yes,
am
yes.
devastated still on the inside. And what was that 7 years, 4 months, and 19 days? Like, was there a moment or that you recognized something had shifted or
It was just this sort of energetic. I think one of the indicators for me was that in early grief, I developed a social anxiety, and I've always been fairly extroverted and social, and relationships have been primary in my life. But in terms of the trauma, in terms of um, different features of it, um, made for wanting to retreat in order to feel safe. And so when I started to notice that I was initiating again more, because that's my inclination, that felt there was just a certain peace and freedom and light that came after that amount of time.
Hmm.
And then you know how it always is, if relative to that, you recognize that you haven't been there. It's not until
Yeah,
you
yeah,
experience, sort of, oh, I'm back to being more me, my sort of natural me, that you recognize the extent to which you were not.
exactly, exactly. Yeah, it's so true. And I think like in the early days, I think grief turns everybody into an introvert. And then and I think it's because I think of grief as like a really deep wound, and everything in your immune system and in your psychological sense is like protect the wound, protect the wound. It's life threatening. And protecting the wound means not going outside and exposing it to raw air and wind, so it's like you've got to kind of stay in, and all those qualities of introverts, like loud noises, big crowds, superficial conversation. It's like that's like actually toxic for the wound. So I think your instinct for self-protection was part of what was happening there. But it's important, I think, for people to be able to hear that, like, it takes as long as it takes, but there's light. Someday you feel light, a little bit lighter. It's not like it's not with you forever. It's not like it's not there.
Well, and I love that you're also referencing this, because it is not only okay, but I feel like that's what our loved ones would want for us. So when if I'd have like a little tiny moment during which I forgot, and I don't know that even in the first years I was even capable of laughter. But if I had a moment where I happened to smile and had forgotten it, I experienced that as a certain amount of disloyalty. And I do think that many grieving parents who have the kind of loyalty that we do as mothers to our children could feel as if there's some betrayal in moving forward. We don't move on, but we move forward. And the loyalty, um, that loyalty is still present, but it's
Yeah,
okay. It's okay to um, live the life that our loved one would want us to.
it's so true. And you say it, and I've got it in the book here, page
Oh,
105. You say, I don't think Chris would want me to feel this bad, but if I'm not suffering, it might seem to him like I don't love him as deeply as I do. And that was just something you were saying to somebody you were working for support with. And it's so well put. And I think it's so true. And it's so true as parents, but I also think that's true in all grief. It's that guilt piece. It's that guilt piece that
yes, yes, it
somehow,
is.
if I feel joy, it means I don't feel sorrow. But the thing is, it's bitter. It's both at the same time. It's bittersweet. We get so familiar with the bittersweet.
I had never before, and still sort of amazed that some of these extreme feelings can coexist simultaneously. I and
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
and I think, we what we've talked about is, sort of moving from A to B, but it's also sort of being able to hold A and B. You know what I mean? It's sort of, because I think that
Yeah.
that's another setup a little bit, sort of like I'm supposed, because as people
Hmm.
who
Hmm.
have any degree of perfectionism or any kind of, I need to present this way in my grief, which I've, done a number on myself with, well, I must be strong in this traditional sense. I should be here instead of, and sort of, again, permission to be just exactly where we are, and really clear that all of this is happening all at once.
Yeah. And I think you're right. Like as a therapist, I mean, for me as a therapist and as a grief therapist, I was like so hard on myself because I was like, I also made these assumptions like, well, I know what's supposed to happen. So somehow like as if I'm immune from actually feeling it and going through it myself, and like I felt like I should be doing it better somehow when I
Oh,
was, when I
right.
was grieving. And then of course, for me, in one of the times I was grieving my mother, and she, there was that central element of just guilt, guilt.
Mm.
Like, I'm a therapist and I couldn't save my own mother. Like, I missed the signs. Like, that was my sort of intolerable pain point. But yeah, I want to talk about Christopher. I want to talk about what your wild child. I want to make sure we talk about, so many of us can relate to loving a wild child, and somebody who kind of doesn't fit, who breaks the mold, who has this kind of irrepressible, kind of magical spirit that you can't tame. And I just think, I found a lot of inspiration, and I find a lot of inspiration that you have are so facile with celebrating his kind of life of the party spirit, um, and also accepting that a spirit like that comes with its own risks. And but you're so you hold, I guess you hold it both in your hands. You hold it all in your hands, like, beautifully.
I hope to. I mean, I do, he was both charming and challenging. And he, and it took me some time to get a sort of read on who this child was. And so it's interesting. I encountered somebody recently who said, my child, I didn't lose my child, but I experienced some grief around the fact that they came out a certain way, maybe more like their, partner's self, or in my case, sort of having different qualities that I'd never before encountered to that extreme in the way of his, attention deficit and um, non-compliance, which was a source of the challenge. But then recognizing along the way, as I developed that understanding and sort of reconciling this piece, and I don't know that I did it entirely until after he died, which is, you would not have wanted him to be anything other than what he was, Sally. So the very way that he was cost you, more time with him, right? In other words, if he hadn't been
Yeah.
reckless, if he hadn't been in the very moment and lived so purely, it wouldn't have been, constant trouble. There wouldn't have been near death accidents that terrified me throughout the course of his life. Um, and yet that's what I so much love. And I'm obviously attracted to a handful. I married my husband, I and Christopher, there's just nobody like him. Nobody quite like who he is.
Hmm.
And to be that free, I want to embody that. If I can channel more and more of his complete open-heartedness. He had tremendous compassion.
Mm.
And if I can lead with that, that gives me the purpose that I'm looking for. And it helps me keep him close.
Yeah. And I think it's why people should read the book, because it's also, as parents, we want to do that, like, I got a wild child, like, and I want to be able to separate out, his essence from his other parts. Like, I don't want to conflate the two. You did a very good job of separating out his essence from his addiction. I don't, I want, like, it's inspiring, like, I want to be that way too. We all want to be that way. We want to just embrace everybody that's in our life and these spirits for what they are. There's like a quote by Tennessee Williams that and it says, it's like, if I lost my demons, I'd lose my angels too. And it's some way of saying that same thing, like, which is like, you have to have the whole picture in order to have that complete. Like, I want to be that way too. I want to have that kind of, like, the compassion that he had, and his kindness for other people, his ability to instantly relate with people so quickly, that
Mhm,
you describe
mhm.
in the book, is amazing.
The impact, and it's really um, quite beautiful that within the context of his 21 years, there was such a great impact on other people to the extent that I'm still hearing about it now and
Yeah.
in
Yep.
various ways. And I think we all need to know that we have an impact. One of the things that's exciting, been gratifying to me about reaching for beautiful, getting into other people's hands, is that people are then reading it and using that as an opportunity to talk about ways in which I might have said something that touched them somewhere that I had no knowledge of. This part about how all of us touch people with, if we're living lives where we're choosing to give love and have that, um, be more important than the fear we carry.
Yeah. And I I think there's just so much wisdom that comes with the process of grief. And I get privileged to hear that from clients a lot. And I had a client say something to the extent of like, I feel like where does all the love of a soul go when they leave? And she said, like, I feel like it gets paid forward and it like keeps expanding and it can't be as expansive in physical form as it can be in the non-physical. And I think it's interesting that like even the book and the way you help us to know him, that means he's touched my life. His love is being spread forward through me now and through anybody who reads the book or hears about him. And certainly in the book, talking about his friends, like the way that they have learned and they learned from him in his life so much. He was like a wise soul. And then they continue to spread it. It just keeps spread. Like it's endless how much the light can keep spreading, which is very, it's so hopeful, so amazing.
It's so inspiring to me, and having um, moved beyond that inclination to entirely retreat and gotten the opportunity to show up and spend time with his friends. Again, anything that connects us both to our loved ones who've passed, but or to any, whether it's in the context of a support group or any place where we feel less alone. So to actually be able to form relationships that didn't pre-exist before he passed with his friends as a means by which to not just feel him closer, but then love them. I mean, the love
Yeah, it's
does
like exponential.
exponentially.
Yeah.
It's just something I'm so excited by, really, is to continue to participate in that.
Yeah, it's so cool. It makes me think of last night or maybe 2 nights ago, my son went to a concert. So he lost his dad when he was 16 when Jay passed away. And a couple nights ago, and I didn't even realize this was happening, but he was invited to go to a concert and he went to this concert with all of his dad's best friends. Like, and they hadn't seen each other in so long, and they just were like, come along. And then some of the kids too. And it was like this big group, but it's this whole relationship that goes on, and they have something that exists outside of of his father. It's 10 years now, but
Oh,
he's still, and that's precious. That stuff is absolutely precious, not just to keep, because it is the goal, as you say. The goal is to how to stay connected and bring them forward with us. It's like we're moving forward, we're not moving on. We need to take their essence, their spirit, our relationship, our love, and bring it forward with us. And how does that look for each person? And seeing how that happens is a beautiful witnessing, really, to see. Yeah.
yeah, I can't even begin to find words to describe that, how, and I think that serves to continue to have me reaching. It's sort of, again, it's sort of like, it's not a negative denial to want to move from pain or suffering. It's a positive denial in terms of just choosing to look specifically at where all of that love goes and then celebrating it. Because Christopher, of course, would want nothing more than celebration around,
Yeah.
those interactions.
Yeah. It's beautiful. It's incredible. Mm. This is so good. I could keep going all day. All right, so I have three questions. You actually are like the first person I've interviewed for podcasts, so I'm so honored and excited. But I have these three questions that I'm like, okay, I'm going to ask these three questions to everybody about grief. So I just want to finish with three, and it's just like a one word, one sentence answer if you know,
You got
if
it.
you
You
if you
got
think
it.
of it. All right. So the first one is, what was the most challenging thing about your grief?
Surviving it, that
Yeah,
pure, deep missing of his physical presence was plummeting.
like the separation. Yeah. Mm,
Yeah,
right.
yeah, yeah.
And then the second one is, what is the most important thing that you have gained from grief, not from the loss? I want to separate out the two, but from the grieving, the healing process, as much as it's
Yes,
still in.
this perspective where there is an acceptance, there is a peace, there's just a knowledge that this is all some greater plan, and only love matters in the end.
So, so true. Yes. Wow. Okay. And then last thing, what advice or encouragement would you give someone in grief, and particularly grieving a child?
Particularly grieving a child, to recognize that they've undergone trauma and that it will be a timely, not a timely, a long-term, forever grieving, but that to keep their hearts open and find every possible means of connecting to their
Mm,
son, daughter, child.
mhm. Yeah, that's beautiful. Thank you so much. I was listening to a like at one point I was at a conference, and there was a monk at the conference. He was an Italian monk, and he did these retreats. This was years ago, but I remember him. He did these retreats for parents who had lost children. And so he had this kind of Buddhist approach, and he just talked about the loss of a child as what he said, the elephant's footprint, because it fits all other
Mm.
griefs inside of it. And I thought, that feels,
Oh,
yeah, really powerful metaphor. um
it does. It feels very much like everything is here as this opportunity to find more light and enlightenment, grow and evolve into
yeah,
wherever we're meant to
yeah.
go.
Well, you're sharing your experience in the service of other people and their healing from this kind of loss and other losses is a huge gift to all of us. So thank you both for talking today, and just for the book. I really appreciate it.
What an extra pleasure to be with you, Leslie. Have
Yay.
loved it.
Yeah.
Loved it.
Yeah. So good.
It's as if